What's the most scariest paranormal activity you or someone you know have ever experienced? The whole time I lived in Lancaster, Pa. There's 3 stories here and I'm not a writer, so bear with me. I lived in a very small town, maybe 2 stoplights in it. We had moved there because my grandmother gave my parents a deal on my late great-grandmother's house. My mother and I tend to be the most sensitive to the unnatural, paranormal, and are generally incredibly intuitive people. My mother has never met my great-grandmother, nor anyone except my father for that matter. Anyways, she was cremated and buried in the backyard, illegal I know. Since she was a known hoarder, my mother had a massive garage sale to sell off all the stuff. My father updated the house with his carpentry skills, and at the time, the basement was being done. Me being me, I was up late on my computer, the family dogs chilling with me. As soon as I finish, I head upstairs to go to sleep on the couch. As soon as I laid down, I noticed an orange flickering light and smoke coming from the basement. I was feeling brave, so I opened the door. The garage was flooded with smoke and orange sparks. I immediately woke everyone up and got them out of the house. My father went downstairs to check it out and save the pups. Luckily, the fire put itself out. It was a shorted wire and a puddle of water. Months later, my family and I are gathered around for dinner recalling that night and also telling some spooky stories. My mother pipes up that when she fell asleep that night, she dreamt of great-grandmother knocking on the door, demanding for her stuff and house back. Chills ran up my spine. I always had an odd feeling in that house, not necessarily evil but active. This recalling just reaffirmed it. Some weeks later, I'm laying on the couch and it's about 3 a.m. I'm on my phone just browsing Tumblr or something. I start to hear a disembodied barking that's circling the house. This went on for 10 minutes. I laid there petrified, only to turn my head to the open bay windows and see nothing as this barking circles the house. Once the barking died down, I let out a sigh of relief, and as soon as I did, I heard the most demonic clicking noise right next to my head. It was like a mix of the grudge noises with the harsh clicking of a sprinkler. Mortified, I jumped up off the couch and started texting my friends to distract me. During my time in that house, weird things happened on and off, but nothing else too noteworthy until I had my friend over one night to drink wine, smoke cigs, and talk about life. We're on the top deck out back at night, there's a spotlight illuminating the yard and deck. We started talking about paranormal stuff, and we got into fears. I started mentioning how much hellhounds terrified me, and just then, a huge black dog ran through the yard. He saw it. I saw it, I was mortified. I didn't even know what to do, but we saw it run off. No neighbors around us had a big black dog, except us with the 2 black labs, but this thing was bigger. It wasn't a wolf or coyote, it wasn't fluffy. Its fur was sheen, its stature like a Great Dane. My friend mentions that story to this day and is honestly one of the freakiest experiences I ever had. When I was about 14, my family moved into a cheap older apartment downtown. This place was narrow, but 2 stories tall, a rarity in my hometown. The living kitchen area was on the ground floor and the 2 bedrooms were up top. Everything was dated, but relatively normal and quiet. Except the stairs. This place had a single staircase connecting the 2 floors. The angle was so steep, seemed like 40 degrees, and it was only 3 feet wide. We checked. The first few months had many missteps and crash landings at the bottom of these stairs. Pretty soon, everyone made a habit of walking slowly and only one at a time. I had a senior cat at the time. He'd drive us crazy, thumping up and down the stairs. It would have been impressive considering how lazy he was if it hadn't been so bothersome. Until one night, I heard that familiar patter of feet racing up and down those stairs, and I realized that my fat old cat was sleeping on my bed. The footsteps seemed to happen more when it was just my sister and I in the house. Sometimes it would stay quiet for a month, only to angrily stomp up the stairs and stop just outside our bedroom door. During the winter time, my sister and I would spend all day outside, waiting until our mom came home to go inside. The summers were often 115 F, and we had to retreat back into the AC. We'd try to stay downstairs and within eyesight of each other. During one of these heatwaves, my sister suggested to try the nearby pool. She went up the stairs to get her swimsuit. I follow maybe a minute later. I get about halfway up when I trip. I then fall forward about 4 steps up the stairs. I suddenly wrench to a halt. My neck is about 6 inches from the corner of the step, with a nail spiking outwards my neck. My left arm was bent backwards, grabbing the little railing from underneath. I bawled and my sister ran to me. We sat outside until my mom came home. I ended up having my arm in a sling for a decent sprain. Mom called her bishop. He came over and blessed our place. My sister and I never heard the running on the stairs again. Once in a blue moon, if I happened to be alone downstairs, it'd feel like something was staring from the middle of the staircase. I was so happy when my mom got a raise and we moved out. I have a few. I work in care homes and mainly night shifts, so obviously, I don't doubt that sometimes my eyes play tricks on me, but a couple instances stand out, nothing overly spooky, but they spook me up. We do sleepovers on occasion, and one time, I was having a really rough shift, and although I was the sleep-in staff member that night, I was needed on the floor. When I finally got to bed about 2 a.m., I was lying there trying to sleep. Was dozing when suddenly, the duvet, which was up to my chest, was yanked off of me and onto the floor. I freaked out and ran to the lounge where my colleagues laughed at me, but then we turned to the window and we all saw a reflection of a man walking. I didn't sleep at all that night. All we could talk about was what he looked like, and we all got really scared when we described him the exact same. The place I currently work, we constantly hear noises which we ignore, but I still psych myself up. This one night, we kept hearing this banging on a window. We checked all windows within earshot, and there was no one at any of them. Then my colleague said another night shortly after, she saw a man sitting in a chair in the office, with the lights off. The lights are motion sensors, so there wasn't a physical entity in there. And he was banging on the chair, but she couldn't hear anything. When she unlocked and opened the door, he was gone. In the sense that as soon as she took her eyes off of him, he disappeared. I was coming down a corridor one day, and I saw the reflection of a woman in a pink dressing gown in one of the pictures hanging on the wall, but when I turned the corner, she disappeared. The one that freaked me out the most happened recently. I was coming down a corridor and right at the end of it, it splits off, and I saw a face creep around the corner. I looked at it and stopped dead in my tracks. Then it snuck its head back around the corner. The lights here are broken, so it was dimly lit, which spooked me even more. I couldn't move, I was so scared. Then I heard loud banging footsteps behind me, and all I could do is reach for my phone to ring my colleague, but she didn't answer. I just stood and accepted that I was going to die when she comes down the lift. I told her about it, so she had to convince me to stay because I wanted to go home. This is a story of my mum's from the late 70s early 80s when she was a little girl. Mum, my aunt and my grandma and granddad were on a trip in Scotland near the Isle of Skye. They were driving on a main road and came to a little town. Can't remember what it was called, but all the houses there were small one-story white houses with straw roofs like something from the 1700s. There were no cars and everyone looked dirty and were wearing dirty old clothes that were like what peasants from the 1700s would wear. As they drove into the village, the road turned from tarmac to a dirt and pebbly track. All the people in the village gathered around the car as Grandad drove slowly through, and people began to gather around the car as it drove slowly. All holding pitchforks, iron rods and other objects, and began bowing to the car and shouting things that sounded like prayers as it drove through. People who weren't gathering round were staring and screaming and shouting as they drove through. My mum remembers that her and her sister pulled faces and stuck out their tongues as they drove through. They assumed there was some ceremony going on and thought nothing of it, except that it was strange. A little down the road, they stopped for a quick break to admire the scenery. My granddad was outside looking through his binoculars when my mum remembers him suddenly screaming, get in the car now," in a voice that mum could only describe as terror. Well, they all got in the car, and my mum remembers seeing this figure. He was in a long purple coat, had long blonde hair and a kind face. The scary thing was, he didn't seem to be standing. He was hovering a few centimeters off the ground, and when you looked at him, he didn't seem quite there. Like he was half there, half not. Transparent almost. My granddad peeled out and was at full throttle and approaching like 30 miles per hour, but he was still there, at my mum's window staring in. Not in a scary way but in a pitiful way. He wasn't running but floating and kept up with the car with no problem. After maybe 2 minutes of top speed where my granddad got to like 50 miles per hour, he suddenly vanished. Like he was there then he wasn't. And it's not like he could just leap into the undergrowth because there wasn't any. After that, they spent the rest of the trip inquiring people about it to see if there was any events in that area. Nobody knew of anything. And recently, we looked up the town and showed mum pictures, and she said it looked nothing alike to what it did on that trip. Also, she looked into it and found there had been other sightings on that stretch of road in the past of a figure exactly how mum described, and even people had drew pictures of the figure. Every single person that drew described the same figure. Some even speculated it was the ghost of Bonnie Prince Charlie, who escaped to safety on that road to the Isle of Skye, wearing clothes similar to those described by my mum and other people who had seen it. I actually had a very strange experience when I was very young. I was living in Taiwan, and I was in a bedroom playing with some other children. My parents never told me they were there, but I assumed they were guests. Also, I have crazy ADHD, so at my age at the time, aka 4 or 5, I didn't care who was there, as long as they could play Transformers or Legos. The room grew darker, and the sun went down. They said that they had to go because it was getting late, and opened the closet door. I couldn't see the back of the closet because it was so dark. They all walked into the closet, much to my confusion. Then the last kid was about to walk in, but they turned around and asked, "Would you like to come with us?" I said no, and he or she, it was so long ago, I can't remember, said, "Okay, let's play again sometime," and also proceeded to walk into the dark closet. I said no because I thought my parents would grow worried if I vanished from my room without telling them. After they all walked in, I grew curious and opened the closet door as well, but I only found an empty closet with a few shirts on hangers. To this day, I wonder what would have happened had I followed them into the closet. Also, info on any kind of event like this would be greatly appreciated, as I still wonder what and who those children were to this day, and I wonder if this is only me, or if this has happened to others. I farm. Always have, always will, but if you farm after dark, that stuff gets scary. Alright, so I have been farming since I was little, and I never really was scared of the dark or any of those strange noises, but what happened that night still scares me to this day. I was probably 12 when this happened. I am 16 now. So, I was just getting done in one of our fields and was putting the tractor in the shed. It was probably around 9 o'clock by then, so it was pretty dark. I backed the tractor into the shed and shut it off. I got out of the tractor and shut the door. I walked down to the end of the shed to grab my phone charger. After I grabbed my phone charger, I heard a click and then the squeak of the tractor door opening. The hairs on my neck stood up because I knew no one was in the shed with me. There were no lights in the shed, only the light of the pole light outside. I pulled out my phone for light. At the time, I had a flip phone, but it was bright enough to see a dark figure sitting in the tractor. I booked it out of that shed as fast as I could. To this day, I don't know what that dark figure was. I am still spooked to this day. I don't like farming alone at night anymore. I used to work at a summer camp as a lifeguard, and this happened on July 2016. It was my third time working at that camp, so all the kids knew me, and I had known them pretty well. The camp was pretty much just an open field with a couple of trailers scattered around, so you could see one side of the camp from the other side. One of the only interesting parts of the camp was a totem pole made and donated by a family that I didn't get to know over my 5 years of working there. I decided to get some pictures of the pole before the camp start, and kids started to show up, but as I was getting my pictures, I heard a bunch of kids call out my name telling me to come down to one of the trailers. Surprised, I waved back at them and finished taking my pictures. When I turned around, all the kids were gone, and the only person sitting on the front deck of the trailer was the camp director. I walked down and went into the trailer, assuming all the kids went inside. After going in, I was quick to discover that there were no kids in there. It was dark and empty all the way to the back. I was quick to get out, and when I left, I asked the director if he saw a bunch of kids, but he told me that we were the only two on campgrounds. That sent a shiver down my spine.